They used to laugh at me like I was invisible, like my feelings didn't matter. Every time I walked into a room, I could feel their eyes sizing me up, judging me. It wasn't just strangers or classmates, it was my own family. My mother, Karen, would make comments that stung like knives, disguised as advice. And my sister, Madison, never missed a chance to point out everything she thought was wrong with me. I remember sitting at the dinner table, plates full of food around us, and feeling like I didn't even belong there. They would whisper to each other, laughing quietly, and I could hear the words. "She'll never be anything. Look at her, she'll never fit in. Why bother trying?" Those words didn't just hurt. They followed me everywhere, like a shadow I couldn't shake. School wasn't any better. I would walk into a classroom hoping to blend in, but the teasing followed me there too. Kids copied what my sister said, calling me names, making jokes about my size. At first, I tried to ignore it, pretending it didn't matter, but deep down it cut me more than I wanted to admit. Every compliment given to Madison, every opportunity she got, felt like a mirror showing me everything I wasn't. And worst of all, the people who were supposed to love me the most, the ones who should have had my back, made it clear I wasn't good enough. Even simple things like getting new clothes, celebrating birthdays, or going shopping became moments of humiliation. My mother would criticize my choices, comparing me constantly to Madison, telling me I needed to shape up or stop being lazy. Madison would add her own layer, sneering at my outfits or my hair, making me feel like I wasn't allowed to exist without being judged. It wasn't just about looks, it was the constant reminder that, in their eyes, I was nothing. And I started believing them sometimes, thinking maybe they were right. But even with all that pain, there was a small part of me that refused to disappear. I started dreaming about a life where I wouldn't have to hear their words, a life where I could prove my worth, not just to them, but to myself. I imagined being in a place where my size, my past, and my mistakes didn't define me, where I could finally breathe without judgment. That little spark of hope grew quietly, almost secretly, because I knew I had to hold on to it. I didn't know how I would do it yet. I didn't know the path would be long or hard, but I knew I couldn't let their words control me anymore. Every insult, every laugh, every whisper became fuel. Somewhere deep inside, I made a silent promise. One day I would rise, and when I did, they would finally see me, not as the girl they mocked, but as someone they could never break. Growing up, it felt like nothing I did was ever enough. My family had their favorite, and it was always Madison. She got the praise, the attention, and all the opportunities, while I was pushed aside like I was invisible. At school events, my parents would cheer louder for her, clapping when she performed, while I sat quietly, hoping no one noticed how small and overlooked I felt. Birthday parties, family dinners, even simple achievements. Madison always took center stage, and I was left on the edges, barely acknowledged. It hurt more than I could put into words, but I learned to hide the hurt behind a forced smile. One of the moments I'll never forget happened on my 10th birthday. I had invited a few classmates over, hoping for a happy day, but my mother couldn't help herself. She made a comment about my size in front of everyone, a cruel joke disguised as concern. "Olivia, maybe if you tried a little harder, you wouldn't have to hide behind your cake," she said, laughing, and my cheeks burned with shame. Madison joined in with a snicker, and the room seemed to close in on me. That day, I wanted to disappear, to crawl under the table and never come out. Instead, I learned to swallow my feelings and smile, pretending their words didn't hurt. These constant betrayals began to shape how I saw myself. I started believing that maybe I really was too much, too big, too awkward to ever belong. But even as I carried that shame, there was a tiny voice inside me that refused to be silenced. It whispered that I didn't have to stay trapped in their opinions, that my worth wasn't determined by their approval. I began dreaming of a life far away from their judgment, a life where I could stand tall and be proud of who I was, without anyone telling me I wasn't good enough. I imagined a future where I could make my own rules, where I could create opportunities for myself instead of waiting for crumbs of attention from a family that only loved Madison. I pictured independence, not just financially, but emotionally. I wanted a life where I could walk into a room and not shrink in fear of being mocked, where my successes would belong only to me. Even though I felt small and powerless as a child, those dreams became my secret strength. I held onto them quietly, like a treasure no one could take. I didn't tell anyone, not my teachers, not friends, not even myself sometimes, because I knew that hope had to survive if I was going to one day escape the shadow of my mother and sister. Each betrayal, each laugh directed at me, only pushed me closer to the determination that one day I would rewrite my story and finally take the life I deserved. High school was one of the hardest times in my life. Every day felt like walking into a storm I couldn't escape. I struggled with my confidence, constantly aware of my body and how different I looked from everyone else. I would try on outfits for hours, hoping something would make me feel good. But the mirror always seemed to remind me of everything I hated about myself. It wasn't just the way I looked. Everywhere I went, I felt invisible, like I didn't belong. Meanwhile, Madison seemed to glide through life effortlessly. She got scholarships, praise from teachers, and attention from everyone around her. People admired her, celebrated her achievements, and my parents were always there to cheer louder for her. And then there was me, always in the background, overlooked and forgotten. No one asked about my day, my successes, or even how I felt. It was like I existed only to make Madison's shine brighter. One day, I overheard something that cut deeper than anything before. I was walking past the living room when I heard my mother talking to a neighbor. Her voice was casual, but her words hit me like a punch. Olivia will never be anything. She's just not going to make it. I froze. For a moment, I wanted to run away, to hide somewhere and disappear. The betrayal stung worse than all the teasing and insults combined. It wasn't just strangers or classmates now. It was my own mother openly doubting me, telling someone else I was worthless. But something inside me shifted that day. Instead of breaking me, her words lit a fire I didn't know I had. I realized that if I believed them, I would be giving them exactly what they wanted. I didn't want to live my life defined by their opinions or by anyone else's judgment. From that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I would prove them wrong. I would show them that their cruelty, their favoritism, and their constant doubt would not stop me from becoming someone they couldn't ignore. I started focusing on myself more seriously, not to impress anyone, but to build a future that was entirely mine. I studied harder, thought bigger, and imagined opportunities where my success would speak for itself. The pain I carried became fuel, and the embarrassment and humiliation became motivation. Every time I remembered my mother's words, I felt a small spark of determination. I wanted to be more than they ever thought I could be, not just to spite them, but to prove to myself that I could rise above everything they tried to use against me. By the time I graduated, I knew that the world outside my home wouldn't define me. I had a plan, a drive, and a determination that no one could take away. High school had been hard, but it had given me the one thing I needed most: a reason to fight, a reason to dream, and a promise to myself that I would never let anyone tell me I wasn't enough. Leaving home for college felt like stepping into a new world. For the first time, I had space to breathe, to make my own choices without constant judgment hovering over me. I rented a small apartment near campus, filled it with the few things I owned, and felt a freedom I hadn't known existed. It was exciting and terrifying at the same time, but I knew I had to make it work. I wasn't just running away, I was running towards something better. College opened doors I never imagined. I discovered an interest in business and entrepreneurship after taking a few classes on marketing and management. Suddenly, ideas that had lived quietly in my mind started taking shape. I loved the challenge of creating something from nothing, of figuring out solutions, and of imagining how my ideas could grow into something real. I felt alive for the first time in years, motivated by a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with my family's opinions. But even from a distance, Madison and my mother couldn't resist trying to pull me back into their world of doubt. I would call home, and Karen would immediately question every choice I made. "Are you sure that's a practical career?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with skepticism. Madison would add her own comments, sneering about how I would never make enough to survive. They acted like my dreams were childish fantasies, and for a moment, I doubted myself. Their voices felt like chains, reminding me of all the years I had felt small and invisible. One evening, I came home for a family dinner, trying to keep it civil, hoping maybe the tension could be ignored. But as soon as I walked in, the room shifted. Karen and Madison started mocking me in front of relatives, laughing at my plans to start my own business. They called it unrealistic, cute but hopeless, and openly doubted I would ever make it. I could feel the humiliation rising, the old familiar shame creeping in. Everyone at the table seemed uncomfortable, but they didn't speak up. I wanted to disappear, to shrink into the floor and escape the cruel laughter. That night, though, something inside me hardened. Their words stung, yes, but they also reminded me exactly why I had left and why I had chosen this path. I realized that their disbelief wasn't truth. It was fear, envy, and the same need to control me that had haunted my childhood. I finished my dinner in silence, smiling politely, but inside I promised myself that one day I would make them regret doubting me. I wouldn't just survive, I would thrive. From that moment, every setback, every harsh comment became fuel for my ambition. I poured myself into learning, working, and building my future. College was no longer just a place to get a degree. It was the training ground for the life I wanted. And with each small success, I could feel the old doubts and insults fading, replaced by a quiet but burning determination to prove my mother and sister completely wrong. I launched my health and wellness brand with a clear idea: create products that help people feel strong in their bodies and confident in themselves. I named it TrueCore Wellness because I wanted the message to be honest and steady, real tools for real change. The first product was a boxed kit with gentle home workouts, simple nutrition guides, and a comfortable, supportive workout top designed for different body shapes. I wanted something practical that would make people feel cared for, not judged. At first, getting started felt overwhelming. I had to find manufacturers who would make a small run, designers who understood the fit I wanted, and a printer for clean, professional packaging. Money was tight, so I used savings and picked up odd jobs to cover samples and prototypes. I learned how to write product descriptions, how to set prices, and how to pack orders so they looked special. Every little skill I picked up felt like building a ladder out of nowhere. When I told Karen and Madison about TrueCore, they didn't hide their skepticism. Karen called it a cute hobby and suggested I find something more secure. Madison laughed and said I was wasting my time on a niche no one would buy. Their words were cold, but they were also predictable. They treated my work like a childish game, not real effort. People around them echoed the doubts. It was painful, but it made the project feel even more important to me. Problems kept coming. A shipment of workout tops arrived with the wrong fabric, and I had to pay to remake them. A batch of printed guides used the wrong measurements, so the nutrition plans were confusing. A local shop that initially agreed to stock my kit pulled out because they were worried about space. Each setback cost time and money, and some nights I cried from frustration. But I also learned quickly. I found a new seamstress who understood my design, reworked the guides so they were clearer, and negotiated a better shipping deal. I started reaching out to small gyms and wellness centers that served communities similar to the one I wanted to help. I visited them in person, bringing samples and explaining the idea, a product that made people feel welcome and supported. Many doors stayed closed, but one owner, Maria, who ran a neighborhood fitness studio, listened. She asked thoughtful questions about materials, sizes, and how the kits would help her members feel included. She agreed to try a small batch at her front desk. Seeing my products on Maria's counter for the first time was a small, bright moment. She sold 4 kits in a week and asked for more. Her feedback helped me improve the top's fit and refine the guide language. The tiny success didn't make me rich, but it proved something crucial. People wanted what I was making. That first client gave me confidence and a real case study to show other businesses. From then on, determination replaced doubt. Every mistake taught me a fix. Every no pushed me to find a new route. TrueCore grew slowly, but it grew with purpose. The early victories, like Maria's studio, were proof that my idea was real, useful, and worthy. Those wins were the beginning of a larger change, the first steps on a path I planned to walk all the way to success. TrueCore began to grow faster than I ever imagined. What started as a small project in my tiny apartment turned into something that demanded more time, more planning, and more people. Orders began pouring in after a few local studios shared their results and photos online. More customers sent messages thanking me for making products that finally made them feel seen. I reinvested everything I earned back into the business: better packaging, stronger materials, and a small warehouse space to handle shipping. It was exhausting, but it was the kind of exhaustion that felt meaningful. With success came change. I wasn't the same unsure girl I used to be. My voice grew steadier, my choices bolder. I began dressing differently, not to impress anyone, but to match how I finally felt inside. Strong, confident, and proud of the woman I was becoming. I started working out, not to shrink myself, but to care for my body the way I always wanted. My posture changed. My energy shifted. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone capable, someone who had built something real. Eventually, news of my success reached my family. Karen called one evening, pretending to be curious, asking about my little company. Her tone carried that same mix of disbelief and control, but it was weaker now. Madison texted, saying she'd heard from someone that I was doing well. I knew they were fishing for details, trying to see how much I'd actually achieved. I kept my answers simple, letting silence do the work that words never could. Then came the moment that shifted everything: a family gathering for my cousin's engagement. It had been years since I attended one, but this time I decided to go. When I walked into the room, heads turned. I wasn't the awkward, quiet Olivia they remembered. I wore a sleek black dress, simple but sharp, and carried myself with calm confidence. The laughter and whispers that used to follow me were gone. Even Karen's expression changed. She tried to hide her surprise, but I saw it in her eyes. Madison greeted me stiffly, her usual arrogance faltering. Throughout the evening, relatives asked about TrueCore, genuinely curious about my work. They listened impressed, while Karen and Madison stayed silent. I could feel their discomfort growing with every word. For years, they had laughed at my dreams, but now those same dreams were standing in front of them, successful and undeniable. I didn't rub it in or throw their past insults back at them. I didn't need to. My presence alone was enough. Watching them struggle to process who I had become was a quiet, satisfying kind of revenge. For the first time, I didn't feel small in that room. I felt in control. When I left that night, I didn't feel angry or bitter. I felt peaceful. They were finally seeing what I had known deep down all along. I was never the weak one. I had simply grown in silence until it was impossible for them to ignore me anymore. And in that calm confidence, I realized my success had already spoken louder than any words ever could. The next family gathering came a few months later, this time for Madison's birthday. I almost didn't go, but something inside me told me it was time to stop avoiding them. I had spent years carrying the weight of their words, and now that I had built a life of my own, I wanted to look them in the eye and say what I had never dared to before. When I arrived, the room went quiet for a moment. Karen greeted me with her usual forced smile, pretending everything had always been fine between us. Madison looked surprised but quickly covered it up with her practiced confidence. The table was full, everyone chatting and laughing, but I could feel the tension underneath. As the evening went on, Madison began bragging about her new job and how hard work always pays off. Karen nodded proudly, praising her, and I realized nothing had changed. They were still the same, pretending I was invisible. I waited until the conversation turned toward me. Karen asked, in that sweet but sharp tone she always used, "So, Olivia, how's that little business of yours going?" The words "little business" hung in the air. I smiled. This time, I didn't feel small. "It's going well," I said calmly. "Actually, TrueCore just hit 7 figures last quarter." The room fell silent. Karen blinked, confused, and Madison laughed nervously, thinking I was joking. When they realized I wasn't, the color drained from their faces. I explained how the brand had expanded into several states, how I had hired a team of employees, and how we were partnering with wellness centers nationwide. Their disbelief turned to discomfort. Karen tried to interrupt, claiming she always believed I'd find something that worked for me. Madison quickly added that she knew I had potential, but I didn't let them twist the story. I looked directly at them and said, "You didn't believe in me. You made me believe I wasn't enough. You mocked my dreams, and you both made me feel worthless for years." No one spoke. The sound of silverware clinking stopped. I could see their defenses breaking, even as they tried to hide it. "You thought your cruelty would keep me small," I continued. "But all it did was push me to build something you could never take credit for." Madison's face hardened, her pride bruised. Karen looked angry, pretending she didn't understand what I was talking about. But deep down they knew. They remembered every word. Every moment they made me feel like nothing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I spoke with the calm of someone who had already won. "I used to think I needed your approval," I said softly. "Now I realize I never did. Your rejection became my strength." The rest of the evening was tense and quiet. I could feel the shift in the room. Everyone saw what I had become and how small their cruelty looked next to my success. As I stood to leave, Karen reached out as if to say something, but I only smiled and walked away. I didn't need closure from them. The truth had been said, and for once, I was the one who held the power. Reaching my first million didn't feel like a loud celebration. It felt like quiet proof that I had made it. I stood in my new home, a place I had bought entirely on my own, and looked around at the space that finally felt like mine. It wasn't about luxury or showing off. It was about peace. Every wall, every corner reminded me that I had built this life without anyone's help, without the approval I once begged for. For the first time, I didn't owe anyone an explanation or an apology for who I was. TrueCore had become something bigger than I ever imagined. The company grew steadily, with a loyal team and a strong community of customers who truly believed in what we stood for. I was traveling for partnerships, giving talks, and mentoring young women who struggled with the same doubts I once carried. My days were full, but they were mine. I didn't have to answer to anyone, and that kind of freedom was more satisfying than any number in my bank account. Karen and Madison tried to stay on the edges of my life, pretending to be proud of me now that the world recognized my success. I saw through it immediately. The same people who once mocked me were now trying to rewrite history. They wanted to be part of my story only after it became impressive. I stopped answering most of their calls. I didn't block them, but I kept my distance. Their approval meant nothing to me anymore. Then one day, Madison showed up at my office without warning. She looked nervous, not as confident as she used to. She said she wanted to fix things, that she missed having me around. I listened quietly, but I didn't feel anger or sympathy, just clarity. I had forgiven her a long time ago, but that didn't mean I wanted her back in my life. I told her gently that I hoped she found peace too, but I couldn't pretend nothing had happened. Her silence said everything. She left soon after, and I didn't look back. It was strange how peaceful it felt to have control over my own boundaries. For years, I thought peace would come from making them understand, but I realized peace came from walking away. I didn't need revenge anymore. My success wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could survive and thrive no matter who doubted me. One evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset over my backyard, a soft breeze moving through the trees. I thought about the scared, quiet girl I used to be and how far she had come. I had turned pain into purpose, rejection into fuel, and shame into strength. I smiled to myself, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, complete. The noise of the past had finally faded, and in its place was peace, earned and lasting. Once my life became stable and successful, I knew it was time to close the last doors that connected me to the past. For years, I had carried traces of emotional and financial ties to my family. Small gestures, shared accounts, little connections that kept them near. I decided to end them all. I paid off everything that linked us, changed my information, and made sure there was nothing left that could tie me back to them. It wasn't done out of hate, it was done for peace. I wanted complete freedom, without the weight of their voices in the background. In their absence, I began to build something better, a real support network. I met people who saw my value without judgment. My mentors were people who taught me to lead with confidence, not fear. My friends became like family, people who celebrated my wins and helped me through hard days without ever making me feel small. They reminded me that kindness could exist without conditions. Slowly, I realized that the love I had spent my whole life chasing from my mother and sister wasn't rare. I had just been looking for it in the wrong place. As TrueCore continued to grow, I started using my platform to share my story. Not for attention, but to show others that rejection doesn't have to define you. I began mentoring young women who had faced bullying, shame, or exclusion because of their looks or size. I told them the same thing I once whispered to myself in the dark. You are allowed to take up space, and you are capable of building something powerful, even if no one believes in you yet. Seeing their confidence grow became my new kind of joy. It made every painful memory feel like it had a purpose. Meanwhile, I heard through relatives that Karen and Madison were struggling. Madison had lost her job and was trying to start something of her own, but people who once admired her were now distant. Karen had grown older and bitter, still trying to control everything around her, but slowly realizing that her words no longer carried power. I didn't reach out. There was no reason to. The best revenge had already happened without me lifting a finger. I had built a beautiful life, and they had to live knowing they were never part of it. One evening, after speaking at a women's leadership event, I walked outside into the cool air and felt an overwhelming calm. I had done it. The girl who was once mocked and dismissed had become a woman who inspired others. I didn't need their apology or approval anymore. Their cruelty had pushed me into the life I was meant to have. That was the real revenge. Not shouting, not proving them wrong with words, but living well in peace while they sat with their regret. I had turned pain into progress, and now my story belonged not to them, but to every person who ever needed proof that healing and success are the loudest answers to cruelty. Looking back now, it feels almost unreal how far I've come. There were days I used to cry quietly in my room, wondering why the people who were supposed to love me the most made me feel like I wasn't enough. I carried that pain for years, but it was that same pain that pushed me to grow. Every cruel word, every laugh, every moment of doubt became the reason I worked harder, learned more, and refused to give up. I used to think revenge meant showing them how wrong they were, but now I know real revenge is living peacefully and being proud of who you've become. When I think about my journey, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel strength. My story isn't about what they did to me. It's about what I did with it. I learned that you can't control how people treat you, but you can control what you do with the pain they cause. I chose to build instead of break. I chose to turn silence into focus, and focus into success. And when I finally found peace, I realized something important. I didn't destroy them. I simply built a life they could never touch. It wasn't easy. There were nights filled with loneliness, and mornings where doubt crept back in. But each time I remembered the little girl who once sat in the corner, feeling unwanted, I reminded myself that she deserved a chance at happiness. So I kept going. I kept believing that one day, all that effort would turn into something meaningful. And it did. My success didn't come from revenge. It came from respect, especially self-respect. I stopped needing validation from people who could never see my worth. Now, when people ask me what changed my life, I tell them this: determination and patience. You don't have to fight every battle or prove every point. Sometimes walking away and focusing on your growth is the loudest answer you can give. The world eventually sees your value when you do. I used to think being underestimated was a curse, but now I see it as a blessing. It gave me the quiet space to build without expectations. My story isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they're not good enough. To everyone who's been laughed at, ignored, or rejected, I want you to know, you don't have to seek revenge. You just have to rise. Let your progress be your power. Let your peace be your answer. And if this story touched you, remember to take something from it. Something that helps you stand taller, dream bigger, and never let anyone make you doubt your own worth. Because no matter who you are or where you start, you can build a life so strong, so bright, that no one can ever take it away from you.